welcome everyone. I'm Mary Beth Vollmer. I'm president of the Friends of Plum and Pilot Islands. And I'd like to thank the Door County Maritime Museum, yay, Fish and Wildlife Service, and our awesome volunteers for making this happen. And you for coming and showing up. Okay, so can we have a share of hands? How many of you are FOPI members? Ooh, nice, nice. How many of you have visited Plum Island? Yeah, nice.
Cool.
How many people know where Plum Island is? Okay, so for those of you that didn't feel comfortable raising your hand, after the presentation, just walk on back and we'll give you guys a tour of what it all is in pictures. Plum Island is part of the Green Bay National Wildlife Refuge, and it is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Friends of Plum and Pilot Islands partner with the service to do the work that they cannot do, such as fundraising and lobbying. Our volunteers devote hundreds of hours each year to support the goals of preservation, restoration, and maintenance of lighthouses, accessory buildings, and other historic resources on Plum and Pilot Islands, while providing opportunities for quality wildlife-dependent recreation on Plum Island. Some folks come to Plum Island to commune with nature, and others come to take part in the historic preservation projects, and still others for the dirt. All to understand links to the past and to preserve history for all perpetuity. James Myster is one of those dirt guys. He can spin a story of past lives just by looking at different colors and textures of a hunk of dirt, really. He can tell you what folks ate, what they did for fun, and how prosperous that they were just by evaluating that hunk of dirt. And he can entice you to get down on your butt and sift trays of dirt amongst the rocks, the spiders, and the ticks. Truly. So without further ado, let's give a hand for James Myster. Regional Archaeologist, Regional Historic Preservation Officer of the Midwest Region, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. His card is this big.
Thank you, Mary Beth. After that, my presentation is probably going to suck. She's far more prepared than I am about that. So, thank you, Mary Beth.
Thank you.
So, welcome. Thank you all for coming today. It's been a while. I've been wanting to kind of give this talk for quite a while, and I'm glad we could set it up to do it now. I appreciate being able to be associated with FOPI and all the work that the Friends Group is doing out at the Plum Island. It's been truly remarkable what's been happening over there for the last, I don't know how many years, so since 2007, since the Fish and Wildlife Service got Plum Island. So as Mary Beth's saying, I am the regional archaeologist. We won't go with all the other titles for the Fish and Wildlife Service. I grew up in southern Minnesota and went to the University of Minnesota and got my undergraduate degree in archaeology and my minor degree in soil science. I ended up going to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville for my graduate work there, and ended up being a historical archaeologist, which is just a fancy way to say someone who wants written records. That really helps. So that's sort of my sort of background to that. This is the part of the talk where I tell you what I don't do. So I am not an expert on Door County archaeology. So if I get lots of questions later on that, I apologize. I'm not an expert on maritime archaeology as well, although this is my first foray into both areas, given that most of my work has been in other parts of the Midwest. So as people have questions on there, I'll do the best I can, but I will be truthful if I don't know, and I could get back to you on that if I look into it more closely. But we'll see how it goes. We did quite a bit of work up there for 3 years here, and we did a bit of research. So hopefully you'll enjoy today's talk and learn a little bit that even though many of you are probably very versed on Door County, probably, and also sort of maritime things. Hopefully we'll learn some different things that we found out as we were doing this excavation up on Plum Island. So thank you very much. So let's see if technology works here. There we go. So most of you know who this is, but you never know who's in the audience. Somebody just got off the boat and they don't know where Door County is, and they said, I'm not sure where I'm at. So for most of you, probably skip some of this. But for those of you who don't know, we are right about here at Sturgeon Bay. Plum Island is right here. It's between the tip of the Door County Peninsula and Washington Island, which is right here. It's about a 325-acre island right there. Let's see what else we got. Here's a much better shot. This is a USGS topographic map. Here's the end. Northport is right here. This is Washington Island. That's Detroit Island. There is Rock Island right here. And this is Plum Island right here. Not sure about the origin of the name. The most common idea is that it's plum in the middle. That has never been found out if that was exactly the reason the name. There are some ideas that may have wild plums on the island. I don't think we've had any evidence of that at all. I think the plum in the middle is probably most likely the reason why it's got its name. The area that we're going to talk about on Plum Island is this area right down here. So those of you, it sounds like a lot of you have already been on Plum Island, so you know a little bit about Plum Island itself. Up here on the top, on the north side of Plum Island, is the life-saving station that was built in 1896. That's right here. Later on, there was a lighthouse station or light station right here. This rear range light was also built in 1896, an Associated Keeper's house right there. So those are the main current buildings on Plum Island, but they were not the first building on Plum Island. And we're going to talk about the first building that we know of that was on Plum Island today. That building was right here in this part of Plum Island on the southeastern part. That'd be southwest or southeastern part of Plum Island. Right there, we'll get a little bit closer into that spot. Right here, here's the beach. Here's the front range light if you've been on Plum Island. Here's a nice beach right here, and as you go through here, the ruins of this building is right here. I'll show you. I think I got another map of the. I thought I had another map. Sorry. So when I started with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2011, and my first foray out to Plum Island was in 2012. Because I heard it was really cool and I wanted to get out of the office. And they said, you should go to Plum Island. I said, you don't have to tell me twice, I'll go up to Plum Island. So here I am in 2012 standing next to these ruins, and nobody knew exactly what these ruins were. There was some idea, there was talk that there was a forgotten lighthouse, and in fact when you read some of the things about the history of Door County and the history of the lighthouses of Door County, there is an idea that there was a forgotten lighthouse out on Plum Island. The current lighthouse that we know in the area, of course, is Pilot Island, which is 1858. And so, walking the island, came across and I was told that there was a big pile of rubble on this side of the island, and so I had to go over and see it. And so this is the first time I encountered this big pile of rubble back in 2012. And of course, as an archaeologist, as the old joke is, nobody's seen the rubbles I've seen. Or nobody knows the rubbles I've seen. That's the joke, right? So, being an archaeologist, I had to dig into it, right? Because that's what I do for a living. So I thought, there's some real intrigue here. Nobody knows much about this. Is this the forgotten lighthouse that people have talked about but really didn't know much about? So what I did was I started a process, or said, why do we want to do this work out at Plum Island? It's just not only for the research. As the Fish and Wildlife Service got the island in 2007, we talked a lot about what we were going to do with the island. Obviously, we are the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and what we do is in our name, right? We do fish and we do wildlife. We're not the Historic Preservation Service, and we're not the recreation service, we're not the visitation service. There's a reason why we have refuges and not parks, right? That's why they call them refuges, because they're supposed to be a refuge from other things. So the Fish and Wildlife Service is not made very well to welcome people onto our lands. That's just the way we design. But we do have things that people want to see. They want to see animals, they want to see plants, and in my area, they want to see cultural resources. So once we made the decision that eventually, with FOPI's help, that we're going to open the island for visitation, I thought as people come to see the cultural resources on the island, they should also have a little bit of archaeological and not just the standing buildings. And I thought the research would help with that, for the public to come in. So here is, now this is kind of older now, but this is a trail map, and part of it is too, is you can see the two main trails that we have from one side of the island, from the life-saving station down to the lighthouse. From the light station here is these main trails, but there's also a perimeter trail that the Coast Guard had originally used to get around the island itself, and the trail goes right by these ruins. So the public is going to see these ruins, and they're going to ask questions. And so I thought we need to find out more about them. We need to find out if these ruins are indeed the remnants of this forgotten lighthouse in Door County. So that really was set the stage on that. So let's talk a little bit about the history here. This is a map from 1835. Now, when the schooner George Washington landed on what's currently Washington Island in 1816, there was not much known about this area at all. The Potawatomi Indians and the Menominee Indians had been in this area for hundreds and hundreds of years. They fought over this area. It's likely that the Potawatomi Indians had settled much of this area in here, and then the Menominee were over here, and they had some battles in this area. And in fact, that's how the area around Plum Island got its name, as you all probably know. This area, the gap between Plum Island and Northport, or the north part of Door County Peninsula, is called Death's Door. Port de Mort, which is a French term, but it's based upon the discussions that the French voyageurs had with the Indians at the time, that this area, this stretch of water between Plum Island and the mainland was extremely dangerous. There are tales of native groups at battles that occurred there, that there was much loss of life as groups went back and forth. The French voyageurs took that to heart, named it what we know now today, Port de Mort, or Death's Door, and that's how it's got its name, through that. So, but as the schooner landed on Washington Island, or what became Washington Island in 1816, there really wasn't much known about this area. And in fact, at the time, there is some reference that actually Plum Island was called Connor's Island at the time. I have not been able to confirm that. Supposedly there is a map from 1816, perhaps from that expedition, that has Plum Island later labeled as Connor's Island at the time. So, and in 1831, the whole area was ceded over from the native groups to America at the time in 1831. In 1836, as you might know, the first lighthouse was built on Rock Island, which is just north of Washington Island, the Potawatomi Lighthouse, in 1836. But already at that time, there was very much a large discussion amongst government agencies that we needed another lighthouse up there pretty quickly because of Death's Door and all the shipwrecks that were occurring at the time. And in fact, in 1837, there was a letter written to the Navy commissioners imploring them to put a lighthouse on Death's Door for mariners, and that was in 1837 for that. And then after that, it really wasn't until about 10 years later, of course, as that's the way the federal government works, right? So it wasn't until 1847 when the Congress finally got around to appropriate money to put a lighthouse on Death's Door. They appropriated $3,500, a total of $3,500 to construct a lighthouse. At the time, the lighthouse service was not very professional in a sense that they did not hire engineers to tell them where they should put lighthouses. They essentially talked to captains and said, you've gone through the Straits and Death's Door, where do you think there should be a lighthouse? That would help us out. And they came, and it was decided that this portion this portion of Plum Island was the spot that the lighthouse needed to be done, right here. So in 1847, it was appropriated, the money was appropriated. 1848, the same year Wisconsin became a state, Plum Island was put into public service. And then in 1849, there was a contract that was put out in February, and it was awarded in February of 1849 to a contractor from Detroit, Michigan, who was awarded the contract to build the Port de Mort Lighthouse on Plum Island. This contract, what's interesting is this contract, if you read the whole thing, also is for the lighthouse at Port Washington. So if you go to Port Washington, the contract for that lighthouse is this contract as well. The contractor got the same contract. What we were hoping, of course, is we were hoping that the Port Washington lighthouse would be an exact copy of ours, but it wasn't. Dang it. It would have helped, but it wasn't. So it was a completely different one. It was one that had a separate tower, and the one on Plum Island was not going to be one that had a separate tower. It was a tower on the building itself. So you can tell from the actual contract itself, it has a dwelling house, which is the main part, either brick or stone, 36 by 20, 16 inches thick, and laid with a lime mortar. All right? You'll have to remember all this because this will become important, and there'll be a quiz later. So attached to the house, there would be a separate kitchen. Doesn't say whether or not that you go into the kitchen from the main house or you come around. A lot of times at that time, you didn't go through the building. You went outside and you went into the kitchen. But they don't indicate here. This is smaller, 14 by 12 instead of 36 by 20. But the wall's the same thickness. They're supposed to have the walls that are the same thickness as the main house. The center of the house building is an octagon tower, 13 feet high above the walls, etc., etc. And it is fitted with the Winslow Lewis lamp. Now what's interesting, this contract is very interesting for what's going on inside the lighthouse service at the time. The lighthouse service was headed by a man named Pleasington. He was notoriously frugal, let's say that. Yeah, I'll say frugal. That's what I tell my family. I'm frugal. And he loved it when things came under budget. That's really pretty much all he cared about. He was described as having a bookkeeper's imagination, which is a very, very nice insult, isn't it? So the $3,500 was probably not enough, really, to build this, as we find out. The Lewis lamp by 1849 was outdated. The Lewis lamps were invented. The Lewis lamps were a series of hurricane lamps that were lit by kerosene and had a big parabolic mirror behind them, which was fine for a while. They were invented in about 1810, but they quickly became obsolete in the 1820s when the Fresnel lens was invented in France. But Mr. Pleasington, for reasons unknown, either didn't want the new Fresnel lenses, which were much better than the Lewis lamps, either because they were too expensive or they were built by Frenchmen. It's tough to tell in the records why that is. But regardless, by the time this contract was put out in 1849, the Lewis lamp was already outdated. But here they were, as a contract in the federal government. Gee, we're still putting in outdated things. I guess we shouldn't be surprised that once in a while. I'm with the federal government, so I can say that, right? So that's a really interesting thing about this contract, and I think it's partly to keep it under budget. Because of the Fresnel lens, even though it was a better lens, it costs more money. All right, so those of you who know Terry Pepper, he's sort of a lighthouse aficionado. In one of his documents, this is kind of how he envisioned it. There's so many minor flaws with this one. Number one, well, what turned out, he didn't really know that, there was only one chimney. The chimney's over on this side. There's not a chimney on this side. Number two, the kitchen is tiny compared to what the specifications are. So this gives you just a rough image. It wasn't that high off the ground. This looks like steps here. It was probably lower than that. It had sort of a half basement rather than a full basement to it. Probably not a bird cagey looking top to it. It's tough to know exactly. We did not find any evidence of what that. I think what happened is after it was decommissioned, things were taken from it quite a bit, and just mainly the walls were kept, and that's about it. So, but it gives you a little bit of an idea roughly what it kind of might have looked like, even though, again, the kitchen in here would have been much bigger than that. So that just gives you a sort of an idea. So it was built in spring and summer of 1849. The keeper, William Riggins is his name, and his family moved in the late summer, even though they were only going to be out there for a few months. I think they wanted to establish it out there. The problem is when Mr. Riggins and his family showed up, there were problems that they noticed almost immediately when they were in the building. And in fact, this letter, which is dated December 20th, 1849, remember, it just opened in the fall of 1849. The inspector of lights came out because he had heard that there were some issues with this lighthouse, and you can read it yourself. There are quite a few issues with the lighthouse that the lightkeeper and his family figured out. They skimped on a lot of stuff. Let's say that. They kept it under budget. Let's put it that way. This one is quite disturbing. The last paragraph. I can imagine most of the time when you really need the lamp is when it's blowing heavily at high winds, right? So it sort of confirmed, as we did the archaeology, we wanted to confirm this kind of thing. Are we seeing these things happening in the archaeological record? These kinds of issues as we looked at the archaeology with it. But anyway, so that's one issue that we wanted to kind of look at. We wanted to confirm or deny those kinds of things, and how does that manifest itself over archaeologically? These are some photographs of the building. This one and the next one looks like in the early 1900s. One of them's dated 1907. I can't remember which one of these. This is a postcard. There, you can barely see it, but there's a gentleman standing right here. He's standing on top of the building right here and pointing. And this is looking out into that store right there. And then here's another photograph of the buildings in the early 1900s as well, of the building. You can see some of the windows here, some of the walls, and they're still pretty high. I mean, they're a couple stories there. There were a couple stories at least to hold the tower on top. So what were our research questions? So the first research question that we had is, what was the evidence based upon the letter of the Inspector of Lights? What do we see archaeologically that can confirm the types of things that he was relaying back to the people in Washington? Also, the second thing we wanted to find out was a little bit about the family itself, the Riggins family themselves. What was their life out there? Could we find anything related to the domestic activities that occurred? We do know that he and his family out there. We found a little bit. We found that, I'll show you later, the census from 1850. We found that, so we know who exactly was out on the island during the time period. You got to remember that they didn't live there year-round. They went out once the ice was out, usually April or so, and they stayed until usually about November. Then they left, and then they came back again. They often brought animals out with them. We wanted to see if that was the case, if they had any domestic animals out there. Did they rely mostly on wild foods? Did they grow anything? Could we see anything there? These are the kinds of things we were trying to find out. What was it like living out onto an island that not many people got out to very much back in those days? So those are the main two things that we wanted to find out archaeologically. So let's go look back. You might remember me back in 2012 standing around here. Here is the main structure of the house itself. And over here is the kitchen. The one thing I want you to notice that I lamented the whole time, and the one regret that I had that we didn't do when I was out there, was right in the middle of the kitchen section of the building. There was 3 or 4 pretty large trees. And I wish I would have been less environmental friendly and asked them to cut the trees down so I could get into the kitchen section more. And you'll see where we put our units in. But there's a reason why we didn't put units in certain parts, is because we had the massive tree area in there. And because of that, there were some things we couldn't do or couldn't find out because of that. So what I would say is future archaeologists, if anybody wants to do more work about that later, they should definitely concentrate on that area that we did not get to for those times that we were out there. There's another, here we are setting up our excavations with the ubiquitous buckets and the screen itself. So let's kind of go over what we found. We did a surface map of the site when we found out. So yes, we mapped in every one of those rocks. That's why you have students. So what I did was because it just for me, it's only me at the Fish and Wildlife Service as far as a cultural resource person. So I teamed up with a university to do the work. So I teamed up with Hamlin University, which is a private university in St. Paul, Minnesota. Again, my office is out of Minneapolis. So we teamed up with their professor. His name is Brian Hoffman, and his crew, and he brought a crew. We had 3 years where we did 2013, 2014, 2015, and it was about 2 to 3 weeks or so, I was trying to remember, for each one of those years. So it really wasn't a lot of time. It was about 6 weeks or 8 weeks that we finally were out there over 3 years. But Professor Hoffman brought his crew, which was usually between about 6 to 8 people, with him, and then I went out as well. And again, it was a very good reason to get out of the office as well, which I enjoyed. But what we did, the first thing that we did is we sat down with our paper and pencil and graph paper and our transit, and we mapped in as many of the rocks on the surface as we could see. And it really did pop out where you could see where things were going to be. You can just see this line was very clear out there. Obviously that was the west wall of the building, and you can see it drops off dramatically. So the north wall's coming here, and here's that big lump of trees that I talked about, and then you couldn't really see this wall very well at all here. Although what we did after we did a surface mapping of all the rocks that we saw, all the limestone that we have out there, then what we did was I did a topographic map where we took depths of rocks and such, and so we came up with this map. I can do it. Here we go. So you can see all the darker areas are areas of low elevation, and all the lighter areas of higher elevation. And so you can really see clearly there's a wall here, and there's some kind of wall here in here. So and then that was the cellar of the main building. We figured that out as we did. So. And here's sort of a composite of what we found. The red marks are what turned out to be the dimensions of the buildings. Here's the main building itself, the house itself, and here's the kitchen wing. Now, there's a couple interesting things that we found, that we figured out when we did it, is that the kitchen did not extend. Remember in the contract specification, the kitchen wasn't going to be as big as the house. So the kitchen, though, in the front, rather than sort of offsetting it here, the contractor decided offsetting it in the back. So you got, when you were walking up to it, you looked bigger than it was. I mean, you had the whole building flat, which is interesting. And I don't know why the contractor did that rather than offsetting it. So that was sort of one interesting thing. I thought there might be a gap, but that's pretty interesting that he did. Is this thing right here, which you can't really see from the surface, but as we excavated, this was very curious. So we did some work back here. We didn't put in a official unit, but we did some excavation around here. We found this little thing right here. We're calling the buttress. And I can't imagine that was done during the original construction of it, because I'm not sure why you would construct a buttress here unless you know that the building is not going to hold up by itself. So either the contractor knew there was something going to be jinky going on here, if that's the right phrase, here, or whether or not that would, and you'll see it in slides in a second, or whether or not that was put in later by the lightkeeper to help buttress the sides of the building up. This one is very interesting. I did not expect to see that. And again, I don't know why the contractor would put that in if they thought the building was secure when they did it. So what we did is, so here are the walls that we eventually figured out, and then the blue are all the excavation units, the test units that we put in. And we decided to concentrate in sort of different areas. So we decided in order to figure out this wall, we put units along here. In order to figure out this internal wall, we put units along here. It turned out we were slightly off, but we got what we needed. And you'll see why in a moment, why this was actually serendipity that we put the units on this side. And then we put units here because I wanted to look at this corner and this corner right here for the kitchen. And that was important. It turned out to be important as well. And we decided just to put a couple units outside of the wall itself, along where I thought maybe the back door was, possibly. And we lucked out there too. So, and you'll see why in a second, why those are important as well. So keep all that in mind as we go, as we talk about this. But there was a lot of information that came out of this. But again, as I said, because we had the big trees, we couldn't go really inside the kitchen, which I really would have hoped to try to do that. And again, if I had done it over, I would have got out my chainsaw. But I probably would have got yelled at by Dusty, who was a ranger at the time. He said, "Don't cut down trees." So let's look at the first thing I talked about, this buttress right here. So it wasn't as visible on the surface, but we could see there was something going on there that didn't match up this line and this line. And so we had, this is Steve. Steve's looking at it before we excavate it, or as we're excavating it. You can see the line, here's the limestone. This is actually looking towards the lake now. If you're from the north and you're looking back towards it. This is the line right here. Here's the corner, here's the back side or the north side of the house, and here's the buttress right here. It comes out in here. And it's pretty tall. Our original idea was that it wasn't, and now I say it's a buttress, but when we first found it, what our first idea was, it was the chimney, right? Because it kind of looks like a chimney, right? And we thought, well, this has to be the chimney. So that's why we were excavating in it. We're going, hey, great chimney, stuff goes in the chimney, we're going to find lots of stuff. Well, we excavated it completely out inside this little square right here. No charcoal at all. None. So I said, dang it, that's not the chimney. It looks like the chimney. That should be the chimney. That makes our life tougher. But so if you go back to Terry Pepper's thing, remember where he thought the chimneys were, right? Well, this is not where the chimney was, so that's why it was confusing to us. But again, his was just an idea, possibly. So we thought, well, this has to be the chimney, but it turned out not. So that's why we're calling it the buttress, because there's no other reason that we can figure out why this thing is. And here it is, completely excavated. And you can tell, we've dug down completely in it. Here it is coming off. And it has no other function that I can figure out other than to support the building. It doesn't have any artifacts in it, didn't have any charcoal in it, didn't have anything, didn't have any, what you might see, you would think you'd see an opening to the building, right? Where you'd cook in there, or you'd even have it to the kitchen. You might have it in the kitchen where you'd have an opening where you could use this for both heating and cooking. No opening to the kitchen, no opening to the house. So that's why we're calling it the buttress, because we can't think of anything else the structure would have other than support. And again, if you think about it, if they're having trouble with the building, swaying or moving, the building of this would really probably help that corner, especially if you've got a chimney somewhere in that area. Anyway, the good thing about archaeology is I can just make up stuff. And that's got to be right? No one's there to tell me wrong until they do other excavations, and then hopefully I'm retired by that, and then they can swear at me. So, but that's what we think this is. We thought it was a chimney. Don't think it's a chimney. The other area we wanted to do is we wanted to look at the walls related to the kitchen. So we did an excavation of this corner right here, and you'll see part of our crew excavating. There's Whitney and Allison and Megan. They are on the corner. You can see the corner right here. Coming right along here. See that? There they are excavating the corner. Solid, looks good. They have a major stone right on the corner, which is great. A little dicey in through here. What you're going to find is a lot of this. Those of you who've been on Plum Island, if you look at the limestone is this Niagara escarpment limestone. It's not very good material for building. It's this kind of the shelly dolomite limestone kind of stuff. It flakes off in in sheets. It's not very good for building. So our guess is that the contractor mined it right there on Plum Island, and that saved money, right? Because they didn't have to bring in bricks, they didn't have to do anything of that, so they decided that they could just mine it right off of Plum Island, and that's how they could save money. But it's not very good material, and it's certainly not very good material if you don't mortar it together very well. And we did find that there were parts of this that weren't mortared very together at all in the foundation, which makes it really susceptible to frost heaving and moving and such like that. The other thing we found on this corner right here is, at least on the kitchen side, the foundations did not go to bedrock. They did not dig them deep enough to go to bedrock. They did on the house side, but on the kitchen side, they did not do that. So you imagine, freezing and thawing in the kitchen, kind of walking here, and it's in the house, and you got going on and everything else. Might imagine that was pretty difficult for them as well. So we confirmed that on the kitchen side, that the foundation did not go to bedrock. On the house side, it did go to bedrock. All right, so that's one area. Again, we looked at what we presume to be the buttress. We looked at this corner in the kitchen. Then we also, we didn't know exactly, since we weren't doing excavations. We knew that the walls were somewhere in here, but we didn't know exactly. So that's why we did this string of units in through here, hoping somewhere in here we'd find the wall, the south wall, and indeed we did. We did that excavation. Here's some more excavation. Folks, here, so you'll see, here is the kitchen. Here is the wall to the house right here. We're looking north, east. And here's the wall to the kitchen right here. But it's not very well mortared together. As we did excavation, it was pretty jinky in there, as I would say, yeah? Right in there and right in there. So, as I said, here are all these major trees in the middle of it. So that excavation confirmed that wall, where that wall goes, and so therefore we could match it up. When we found it, then we could match it up into this corner right here. See this little one right here? And it continued on here, and we did find this corner as well of the kitchen, and also that was not on bedrock. Okay. Now, this is a very interesting area in here. So we decided to do some units to try to find this interior wall, to find out about this interior wall here, and some very interesting things came up while we did this. So, let me show you I'll show you the photograph. Okay, so here's Camille. So here is the interior wall that was excavated, and what we found was, here's what we think we found. We found a series of rocks piled up against the interior wall. What we think that was the lightkeeper pushing rocks against the interior wall to try to shore this wall up. And in fact, we found evidence that the fireplace was right here. We did find charcoal. We did find an opening right here. But it was closed. So what happened is the fireplace was moving around or such, and they were shoring it up, and they were trying to shore this wall up. So in order to do that, they needed to pile rocks against it in order to shore the wall up. So then what they did was they abandoned the fireplace here, and in fact we found the fireplace right here in the corner, right there. And again, what's interesting about it, it's near the buttress, but I can't call it a chimney. Maybe it was the chimney. I don't know what it is, but it certainly wasn't the fireplace. So maybe they used it as chimney or something. They just aired it out through that. But they did move, and here's the next picture. So this one is looking, if you look, so the next picture is going to be looking this direction, in that corner. And if you look at the next picture here, that's probably way over time. Oh, am I doing time? Okay, we're good. So we're looking east now. So the original chimney was over here. They were piling rocks up against that wall. They had to abandon the chimney here. They moved it, and we found a lot of charcoal right here, in this corner right here. So, and we found artifacts and such of that. In fact, we found a number of domestic artifacts in there, a lot of burnt bone, things like that, obviously for cooking and such like that. So that's what we think was going on, and that's what we think would happen in the building itself. For that. So let's review a little bit of what we found archaeologically. So this is what the contract said, and this is what reality was. So the contract said 36 by 20. The actual was 29 by 17. It's a little tinier. Kitchen dimensions, supposed to have been 14 by 12, 12 by 10. A little smaller. Wall thickness, 16 to 20, 12 to 22. The thickness was really interesting. It did vary quite a bit. It just depended. The kitchen ended up smaller, not surprising, I guess, if you're going to tuck it in a little bit. That kitchen's probably the place you want to do it. It's not holding the weight of the light or anything like that. Such. So what you got is you have extensive shoring of the walls. We found evidence of that. Movement of the fireplace. Yep, the kitchen wing, the walls didn't sit on bedrock. Again, as I said, probably you have yearly frost heaving. You've got, especially with high winds, the evidence is pretty clear, archaeological. Like the superintendent of lights was saying that the keeper was having a hard time, and his family was having a hard time out there, just keeping it up. And also, if the lamp was going out when you when you most needed it, that was obviously a very bad situation. And I would imagine, given the federal government's delay, I would imagine they knew fairly quickly in the early 1850s. Remember, this was only built in 1849. They knew fairly quickly that they needed another light. That either this one had to be torn down and rebuilt, or another light had to be built. And in fact, as it seems like the evidence points to, that the mariners were saying that the light placement wasn't very good either. So they decided in the 1850s that they needed to move the light, and then that's eventually when you got the Pilot Island light, which was built in 1858 over on Pilot Island. And that was built with a Fresnel lens, that was built with brick, as those of you in the room know, needs a lot of repair, but the brick has stood up from, since 1858 out there. So that sort of doomed this lamp, or this lighthouse. Was the construction of it, and how it was not destined to last very long, like many other lighthouses. And that was really the reason why it became the forgotten lighthouse of Door County, because of that. It only lasted less than 10 years for that. So let's look at the collection then. So now we know something about the architecture. Let's talk about a little bit about the collection. And again, after the talk, you're certainly welcome to come up and take a look at that, and I can answer some questions about the artifacts that, this is just a pretty good sampling of some of the artifacts. You'll see some of the photographs of them up here regarding that, so you're certainly welcome afterwards to come up and see that. So again, we did about 27 different 1 by 1 meter test units around there. We did also some testing around the structure itself. We did find, I didn't show it on there, we did find what looks to be the original privy in the back, but it had been cleaned out. There were no artifacts in it at all. Darn it, it had a brick base to it. The building itself was completely limestone. The only brick on that we could see archaeologically was part of the fireplaces themselves, the chimneys, and also the privy in the back had some brick on it too. But we just found the base to it, and it was all cleaned out. It reminds me when I was, if you go to Cana Island, if you look at the privy there, which I'm probably one of the only people that ever looks at privies, when you go to lighthouse places, everybody's looking at the lighthouse and going, oh, look, there's a great privy. Look at that privy over there. But if you go to Cana Island, next time, look at the privy. The privy that they had is probably very similar to the one they had at Plum Island. It's about the same size, and at one side was the actual privy, and the other side was the clean out. And so you would have to go in and clean it out. Those of you who have been on Plum Island, the bedrock is fairly shallow in Plum Island. And so they would have had to dig, they would have had to clean it out rather than just dig another hole. So but anyway, so if you go to Cana Island, look at the privy. People will think you're odd, but that will help you to kind of look at what you might have had at Plum Island. Anyway, so we did some surface collections. About 16,000 artifacts, 97% were glass or metal, and you'll know why in a moment, why that is. We forgot to talk about, I think coming up, the last 2 units that we did there. But we found, actually, unfortunately, found very few domestic ceramic items. And there's a couple reasons why I think that was it. Partly is it's a seasonal occupation. So they're not there all the time. They're there in the summer, right? Couldn't dig in the kitchen as much, as I said before, because of that the tree roots and such in there, so we missed out. They're still there for future archaeologists if they want to work there. You got to remember that it was in the summer, people are out of the house. There were, we'll find out in a second how many people were actually there, but there were a lot of people on site. I would imagine if they were like my mom growing up, when it was nice outside, she essentially said, everybody outside. I don't want nobody in the house when it's nice outside. I'm sure that's what they did. Is do it once it was nice, everybody was outside. So there probably wasn't as much deposit inside the kitchen or the house because everybody during good time, good weather, people were outside a lot. So we probably missed some there. And again, here's the brick privy that I talked about. But when we excavated in it, there were no artifacts in it. It had been cleaned out at some time. All right, here's the assemblage at the site itself. Again, mostly chimney glass, and you'll find out in a second why that is. But a lot of chimney glass, some window glass, these cut nails, round nails, as we see nowadays, weren't invented until 1890. So these are all these cut nails that you have these square nails. You'll see some examples here too. Found a number of those, and then some other sort of various material, but a lot of architectural stuff. All right. Let's get back to those lonely 2 units at the top here that I excavated. And again, we put them there because, again, as I thought, if you've got the house with the lamp on it, that's kind of where the back door is. And what I found as an archaeologist, people like to just chuck stuff out the back door. Right? Just open up, chuck it out the back door. So I thought that's a great place to put units because people just throw stuff out the back door. Well, that happened here. But what we found was extremely unexpected for us. We found a very large dump of hurricane glass. And in fact, here's some very small. We have much more than this. These are all hurricane glass fragments. As you might get, the Winslow Lewis lamp was a series of hurricane lamps, kerosene that you would light, and there would be a parabolic mirror behind it, and that would put the light out. So what we determined that they had a major catastrophe. Probably somebody dropped a box of hurricane lamps. Probably I couldn't tell that it was multiple years of stuff just being thrown out. It looked like somebody had a major event. The kids, let's blame the kids. The kids had a major event and somebody dropped a box of hurricane lamps because it was thousands of pieces of hurricane lamps. And the students were not happy. Plus they're sharp too, and it's tough to get them with your gloves on, and so you have to pick them out with your fingers. And so that really occupied ourselves quite a bit, was picking out a lot of those. But we found thousands of small pieces, and that's the only thing I can think of. It wasn't a constant event where one would break and they'd throw it out the back. It just seemed like it was more of a dump, like they had an issue, and then said, oh, go out and throw out those hurricane lamps. Saying, okay, right out the back. So, so let's talk about the life as the lighthouse keeper and his family. I always find this quote very interesting. It just sounds so idyllic. You know, just wonderful, or cultivating vegetables and fish and game are plentiful and everything, it looks good. Probably not so much on Plum Island, although they were doing certainly some of that as well. But I'm not sure when you're trying to hold up the walls and you're trying to take care of the kids and the lamps going out when it's blowing. Probably not as good as this sounds like, right? But I always love that quote because we would like to do that. So let's talk about the family themselves. So here's the 1850 census, September 25th, 1850. So here they are on Plum Island. Here's William Riggins, the lighthouse keeper, 32 years old, born in Virginia. And his wife, Phoebe. And if those of you know anything about our boat on the Fish and Wildlife Service, we named her the Phoebe, after Phoebe Riggins. 28. She was born in Ohio. They had children. Here's Catherine. She's 12 years old at the time. Here's Royal. He's 11. And in fact, Royal was sort of the assistant lighthouse keeper. They refer to him as that, even though he's 11 years old. And in fact, he became assistant, I think, on Pilot, I believe, in 1858. He stayed on and became the assistant at Pilot in 1858. So here's Royal. Again, this is 1850. So he would have been 19 at that time, so he would have been of legal age. Here's Mary. She's 7 years old. She was born also in Indiana. So here we got mom and dad, 3 kids. Wait, we're not done yet. Got more kids. Here's Rodney Riggins, 2 years old, born in Indiana. And this one's really interesting. Here's William Jr. Look at how old he is. 1/12. So he's only 1 month old. So this is September of 1850, right? Where was he born? Plum Island. Look, he was born in Wisconsin. So you had him. So William Jr. was born on the island in probably August or July of 1850.
That is interesting.
And here's another interesting thing. Here's another Phoebe, spelled the same way. You know, Fish and Wildlife Service, we think Phoebes are with O's, right? Because of the bird, right? Well, here's another Phoebe. She's 20 years old. She's obviously a domestic. You know, they brought her out there because they had 5 kids. So you had 3 adults, you had 5 kids in a building that was, what, 20 by whatever? Imagine that. That would be, everybody get out the door. All right, it's 65 degrees. Get out the door. It's 65. So this is what you see right there. You have 3 adults, you have 5 children in that building. You imagine the building rocking and rolling, especially with bad weather, trying to keep the light lit for mariners. I would imagine the 8 years or 9 years that this was operating must have been quite eventful for the family. So, but anyway, so there's the census in 1850. Very, very interesting to find out about the people that were actually out there and their lives. So what else did we find domestically? No, I didn't find any firearms-related things at all. I'm sure they're there. We just didn't find any in the units that we did. Not a lot of personal items. With that, we didn't find that. Not a lot of bottle fragments. No medicine bottles. It was very interesting. We usually find those a lot archaeological medicine bottles because there are a whole variety of different reasons, for that. But none of that, which was very interesting. Again, there may have been more in the kitchen that we couldn't get to. Very few store-bought tools. You'll see scraps of things that obviously were repurposed or redone. Not surprising. Some clothing buttons, some smoking pipe fragments. We have a slate writing board, one of them with an R on it. You'll see in a second. I've got a photograph of that. Stick pins, scissors, thimble. I do have those there. Watch chains. I think we have one watch chain that I brought today. Here is some photographs of the buttons, some of the buttons that we had found there. These are two tined forks that you see right there. I have them here today with us. You can see those in person. That's one to take a photo.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Here's the slate writing. That's an R for Riggins, I would imagine. So you can just see the R etched in there. And here's a little clay pipe, and I have the example right here with a little face on it. That was a pretty cool find. We enjoyed that day. Whoever found it got a beer. I didn't find it. And then the ceramics. Lots of mostly plain whiteware, as we call it, pretty utilitarian, not surprising. You know, wouldn't be very fancy. But we did find one set that showed up that we like to think is Phoebe's favorite set, because again, as Mary Beth says, I like to spin a few stories here. So that's a story we like to spin. That Phoebe really liked the Roan set. What's really beautiful about this, as far as an archaeologist, is the dating on it. So these patterns came out exactly when this. As an archaeologist, you always want something with a date on it, right? Because people go, how do you know how old something is? You know, aren't you just making it up? You don't really know. You know, it helps to have something that we know was dated or made during a certain period of time, but it fits exactly this period of time, which is really nice. And I've got it here too. This beautiful black transfer print, what they call Roan, or what they call romantic scenery, is sort of the general name for this one. That was pretty interesting to find that as well. Mostly mammal bones, a little bit of fishing, a little bit of birds, mostly mammal itself. I think most of it is wild. So remember we talked about whether or not they brought their own animals on their goats or pigs or whatever. Did not indicate that. They got most of their animals in the wild, hunting on probably Plum Island, fishing, etc., etc. There's no evidence that they had corrals or other things that would have animals out there. Probably later on in the Lighthouse service, as it become more professionalized, and certainly on Pilot they did. We know that on Pilot, but at least on this early Plum Island one, it does not appear that they had a lot of domestic animals out there that we can tell, which is pretty interesting. Kind of fend for yourself a little bit. Send the kids out to hunt and stuff. We found a lot of burned bone, not surprisingly, sawed bone, etc. Some even had some carnivore marks. Probably had a dog out there as well. Looks like something got chewed on. So let's look at sort of the conclusions, and I think I'll wrap up here pretty quick. I think we're about there, and then questions. So as pretty much you can see it, probably difficult at times. We'd like to believe that it's idyllic, but I'm sure it was very difficult for the family to be out there. All those adults in a small area. The building was poorly constructed. They had to maintain it quite a bit, which I'm sure they didn't feel like they signed up for when they were part of the Lighthouse service. Really bad, I'm sure, when the weather was really awful, when you really needed the building itself. There were some domestic artifacts, not much. Again, I've sort of indicated why I thought that is. Not a lot of evidence of government-issued things, because, again, it wasn't quite as professionalized as it became later on. Certainly after Pleasanton left the government and they professionalized the service more, they started to issue uniforms, they started to issue more things to the lighthouse keepers. But at this point, it was a little less professionalized in that sense. So we don't see the buttons, we don't see the uniform buttons that we see later on in Lighthouse. So let's leave me at there. Does anybody have any particular questions that they would like to ask about that? Yeah, go ahead.
Soil scientist.
Uh-oh.
What was under that foundation where it wasn't the bedrock? Is it sand or a sandy loam or clay? Or it's garbage, gravel.
Yeah, what the question was, what was under there? Yeah, I can't remember. I should look that up. I don't remember. It was pretty clay. Usually when you have a limestone bedrock, clay develops on top of the
Yeah.
limestone. So it was sturdy enough, and that's probably what the contractor decided, that it was sturdy enough. You know, and they probably thought, well, there's not as much weight on this side of the building, you know, the tower's on the house side. So they probably thought, yeah, I think it'll be good, you know. And so mostly clay, as I remember.
Yeah.
But certainly you should put it to bedrock, as we all know.
It's such a relationship to, because on Rock Island, that Port Cornell, I mean, he fought for 30 years to keep the original structure standing up that was falling down. Whereas they got it changed over in 10 years to pilots. That tells me that the Mariners were way heavier about this location than the Rock Island location.
Yeah, well, yeah, if you read about, even if you go through this museum, I mean, they talk a lot about Death's Door and all the shipwrecks and everything. I would imagine that there was a lot of pressure to have more on that. And that's why Plum Island, you had Pilot Island, and look at, even later on, they did another range light. They did another light on Death's Door, you know, with the 1896 Plum Island range light. So obviously, there was more pressure, you would think, because of the traffic, I would imagine.
And something also came to me, sorry,
No.
but that location is so close to the range light location. I'm thinking that spot to get through the reefs must have been really something on those original pilots' mind that they said put it there, not at the point
Yeah,
further south and east.
yeah. No,
And it's kind of interesting that they're almost there.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, we sort of ridicule them and say, "Oh, they put it in the wrong spot." My guess is they weren't close. They got close, and probably if they would have had, rather than sort of the natural inclinations of a ship captain, or where would you like it, if they had gotten some engineering out there,
Yeah.
where they could have done some analysis, they would have came up probably where the front range light is now, which was what, I don't know, 50 yards,
50 yards,
if
it's
that.
close.
Yeah, they were close, but they because they didn't have the engineering aspect, they got close, but it wasn't close enough for what they do. But that's a good observation, that where the front range light is now. So very good. All right, any other questions about the excavations or the artifact stuff? Yeah, go ahead.
James, is it possible, when you're talking about the hurricane glass, is it possible as that shoddy building was falling apart, that actually dropped off the roof?
Well,
And it got blown over?
anything's possible, I guess. I don't know. I prefer the dropping of the box. I don't know why, because I can just see that at my house, you know. And the kids, and you know, somebody drops it and they're like, "What was that?" "Oh, nothing. Nothing." "Do we have any more lamps anywhere?" So yeah, anything's possible. But for me, we were just trying to decide if it looked like a multiple event. You know, every so often somebody breaks it, or you light it with the kerosene and it gets too hot and it
Right.
shatters,
Shattered, yeah.
or something like that. Or whether or not it looked like it was maybe one catastrophic event. And I guess I come down on the catastrophic event just because we found so much in one spot. And you would think it was over time, you know, they'd be tossing it different places. They wouldn't go after their one favorite glass dumping spot. You know, that's usually an event. But again, that's the beauty of being an archaeologist. You can speculate all you want, and no one can tell you differently. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So in your shovel holes, no privy anywhere?
Well, no, there was a privy in the back. We found a privy that had a brick bottom to it, but it was cleaned out. Yeah, they did that because, you know, if you're as an archaeologist, you find if you're in an area that has a deep soil, it's much easier to dig another hole and just to pick it up and move it. But when you're in an area that has such shallow bedrock, it's much better to dig one, because you have to chip out the bedrock and just clean it out. So I would imagine that was a kid's job to do, go out and shovel out the privy. So that was one thing they could do rather than be in the house. But that's
Would
what you
it
see.
have had stone walls?
Yeah, it had brick. Yeah, it had brick walls. It looked like, I can't tell above the ground because above the ground is gone, but at least from the ground level down to the floor, it was brick. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. I thought there was a, yeah, go ahead.
Was this structure the one that Robert Noble spent his
Right,
infamous
yep.
night or two in?
Yes, it
And at
was.
that time, wasn't there still some type of a fireplace?
There was, and so Yeah, no, oops, I'll come back to it. Yeah, so that fireplace probably was this one right here. Yeah, and so the story goes, you probably know the story then. Yeah,
But
that
I
he
can't
tried
remember
to,
what year.
was it
60,
1865?
65 or 67, yeah.
Yeah,
And
so,
it had really deteriorated by then.
yeah,
Really,
because
the
it-
only thing left was a fireplace.
yeah, that was it. That's what I'm guessing. You have probably professional salvagers and amateur salvagers come out there and strip the place. So there's probably not much left except this fireplace. And so I'm sure this was the corner that he was trying to do that
And it
in.
was a sub-zero event, so it would have been a nor'easter, so that would have been your hiding place behind that northeast wall.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then I guess when he started any water, when it finally got warm enough, he melted the snow and then put it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the story, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, my guess is it's right here. That would have been this corner right here. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So was there any metal detecting activity as part of this investigation?
We did, yep, I brought them, that was part of the surface thing too, is we did do metal detecting, and so we did find some things. Nothing unfortunately related to the tower or anything like that, but we did do some metal detecting around the edges, yeah.
I'm not a metal detectorist.
I'm not either, but I play one on TV, so I
I'm curious to know, what is the current policy out there as far as the public coming with metal detectors and digging holes? And
the current policy is no. And I could get away with it.
Is that on the regulation board?
Federal land.
I don't know if it's on the board, but yeah, it's definitely remote and on federal land, unless you have a permit, or you're the regional archaeologist.
Hey, rank has its privilege.
There you go.
Watch out.
But yeah, no, that and drone use is prohibited unless you have a permit, that kind of stuff too, so. Any other questions at all, so? Oh, yep.
How do the students deal with all of those 15 or however many thousands of artifacts? How do they clean them? How do they deal with all of that?
They
They probably have to do
complain.
the grunt work.
What?
They have to do the grunt work.
Well, of course.
yeah.
Brian and I, as you saw the last picture, we were kicking back. No, what we figure out is if you can make it through that, then you want to be an archaeologist, right? You can't get the easy stuff right away. You got to work your way up and understand that it's mind-numbing work that doesn't pay anything. And once you understand that, you're perfectly set to be an archaeologist.
You're a fully volunteer.
Yeah, or about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Summer, I don't.
If you know someone who's a good cook, that can be on that team.
Absolutely, yeah. We have that Steve, who I showed in that one picture. He is a cook. He was a chef, I should say. He was a reformed chef. He liked being a chef, but he said it's very crazy, and so he decided he wanted to be an archaeologist. And he actually works for the Minnesota Historical Society now, still.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but he's there. And one thing I did, and thanks for asking me to put the dip, I want to do a shout out for Lou Clark,
Yes.
who I met then. We met back in 2012, and Lou made the mistake of saying, "I've got a boat." I said, "Great, we need to get out to Plum Island to do this project." And Lou, this was before the Fish and Wildlife Service had a boat. Or we had the Zodiac. I don't know if any of you were there during the Zodiac years.
I had to deal with the Zodiac.
Yeah, which was one of those bouncy bounce ones.
Did you get all back before we left?
Yeah, so Lou was so very nice to resurrect the Mockingbird, which he still has going today. He was so wonderful bringing us back and forth. Sometimes we had to do twice in the morning and twice at night. And without you, Lou, we couldn't have done the project. There's absolutely no way we could have done that project. So thank you.